Hi, welcome to Astro Action, Astrology for Proactive Spirits. This video is part 2 in a series entitled Neptune in Pisces 2012 through 2025, The Big Goodbye, Don't Be a Slave. In the first video, I gave a general philosophical look at the archetype of Neptune and its transit through Pisces. We're going to give a quick overview of some of those ideas in this video before moving on to an in-depth look at historical events and what it means for you personally. So, Neptune, also known as Poseidon, was the Titan in Greek mythology that was given domain over the oceans. In this way, it has been strongly connected to the idea of the collective unconscious, or I would like to say the cosmic collective, or connection to the universe itself. In this way, it relates to the science of cosmology and physics and our understanding of how the universe itself just works. The thing in itself, philosophically speaking, as Kant described, the noumena versus the phenomena, the appearance of things. In this way, it relates to themes of illusion and truth. Neptune is the great veiler and unveiler. It removes the illusion and reveals the truth. So there are themes of dissolving or eroding boundaries and structures. And this is in the same way that endings tend to do in preparation for a news cycle. It's hard to keep it together or to keep your structures together, symbolized more by Saturn. So there's a lack of coherence. However, there is more of an intuitive ability, an intuitive strength. Okay. So with Neptune in its ruling sign of Pisces, the sign it's most at home in and has its dominion over the mutable water sign, we're going to see a lot of watery or water-related symbolism, language, and synchronicities. Water in all its forms, as well as a lack of water or water crisis. So Pisces is the final sign in the zodiac or the archetypal journey of life. Therefore, it's the summation of all the signs. It relates to endings and the symbolism of the old man, the end of an era, the tail end of things. You kind of think of the two fish tails when you say that. Looking back and assessing this previous cycle, okay? Being water sign, therefore, it's very emotional, it's very moral, it's very resourceful, but can be confusing and deal with delusional fantasy. It can be very creative and artistically inspired, but discipline is needed or else you'll tend to get lost. Being the 12th house again, relates to the unconscious, it relates to sleep, to beds, dreams, the unconscious realm. But an ever-widening spiritual experience of life that changes who and what you are in those 12 years. Relates to the feminine archetype generally, and we'll see that showing up in many different ways. And all forms of escapism, whether it be religion, ideologies, political ideologies, drugs, especially a dependency on drugs. So all forms of escapism in this sort of search for bliss and ultimate union. It is strongly synchronized with the advent of the photography and the film industry. This Neptune was discovered in like 1846, and these things were being developed in that time. We'll go into that more later. Also relates to, of course, music and dance, sort of flowing art forms. And again, like political or religious ideologies and or conflicts, okay? So there's a strong connection to utopian aspirations like communism, Marxism, which I think translates into wokeism later. It relates to oil as a resource and the markets generally, as seen in the word currency, as in the currents of water. Okay. There are themes of attachment, bondage, like martyrdom, sacrifice, slavery. And in some of its most low forms of the spiral, we have a total disconnection from reality and loss and sort of submersion into the unconscious or loss of ego in the form of mental illness. It deals with all things, all people that are marginalized, that are pushed aside, put in the closet, so to speak. Okay. So in that way, it deals with places of illness, hospitals, infirmaries, mental institutions, but also the homeless and immigrants who are trying to find their home, right? There's a theme of feeling lost or unable to see the future, hopelessness, the lost years, and conversely, divine connection or unification, potentially. Now we're going to look at the 1850s when Neptune transited through Pisces to get a brief idea of how that manifested at that time. Now, this is not going to be a history channel, but looking into some of these events wakes you up to the idea that, wow, this really happened for the 1850s and going forward into the 2012 period. Now, in 1858, for example, as Neptune conjoined the North Node, which is happening right now as well, there was a speech given by James Henry Hammond of the United States Senate promoting the idea of King Cotton in support of slave labor. Okay, so there were a lot of debates going on, and a lot of moves towards abolition were being defeated, actually. So like I said in the first video, this was the end stage, really, of the system and economy of slavery, which the South was based on, this type of basically free labor. Okay. This led right into the Civil War. Okay, as Neptune entered Aries. Other examples, the British Parliament passed the Government of India Act, which effectively transferred the power of East India Company directly to the British Crown. Okay, more indications of like oppression and enslavement in a sense. Okay, and I'm going to continue on my other list here. A few political things. There was a Second Opium War, which, that relates to the drug theme. Okay? There was the Crimean War in this period, the 1850s. Very interesting that as Neptune re-entered Pisces, going all the way around the zodiac, we had the Second Crimean War in 2014. And that's basically continuing on into this Russia-Ukraine war that we currently still have going on. Okay. Talk about history repeating and echoing itself. I'm not going to get into every political story or conflict. It's just too many of them. But moving on to like science and technology, I think it's really interesting that there was the invention of the gyroscope, which was critical instrument used for navigating the oceans. There was a lot of developments in the submarine, like the first submarine that really carried a crew of people underwater was in 1855, and it made 130 successful dives before being lost at sea. And that was the Sea Devil, which I believe was a um, done for the Russian government. Um, Also, there was the Panama Railroad was created, which joined the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean, and the same thing in terms of the development of the railroad across the continental United States that joined the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans as well. All right, that's generally what was going on in that period in the United States, was that traversing the entire continent like that. Let's see. Also, there was the first publication of Gray's Anatomy. Talk about peeling the veil off and then being able to see the entire human organ system and everything like that. Also, very significant. 1859, Charles Darwin publishes The Origin of Species, putting forward the theory of evolution and natural selection. This became the basis of all natural science going forward. Another great unveiling in terms of the story of human origins, removing the veils of illusions and of the many religious mythologies and stories that people have held on to for so many centuries. Okay. Florence Nightingale publishes Notes on Nursing. That's pretty interesting. There's just so many of these synchronicities. Epidemiology begins, okay, tracing the outbreak of cholera in London. It's a very something that deals with like the masses and the mass outbreaks of very large populations. Something that unifies people. Okay. So many things. What was the other one? I think I talked about the photography issue. We got Charles Darwin. Okay. Now remember, it was the publication of Moby Dick by Herman Melville, otherwise entitled The Whale, the classic work of Melville. Pretty significant synchronicity there as well. So we're going to get into the good stuff here concerning 2012 through 2025, Neptune's transit. Okay. Let's see, where do we get here? Now, a special note here is that Uranus had traveled through Pisces for 7 years just prior to 2012. When Uranus was in Pisces, this is the planet of shocks and surprises. In the sign of the oceans, we had the Hurricane Katrina, which devastated New Orleans. Okay. And if you look at the New Orleans chart for the city of New Orleans, there's some interesting connections there, as Pluto was in Pisces. So Uranus had conjoined that Pluto there, which is death and transformation. I can't make this stuff up, people. Okay, so, but in 2012, just before 2012, we had, as Neptune was in Aquarius, you had Uranus in Pisces. So those two planets were in mutual reception. They were both in each other's sign that they rule. So they were having some kind of mysterious communication with each other, working together in some strange way. And right at the very end of this, as Neptune was about to go into Pisces, and actually it was like 2011, I believe, because Neptune is kind of bobbing in and out of Aquarius or Pisces. We have this very apt symbol, which was the Fukushima disaster in Japan, the tsunami that greatly impacted this nuclear power plant. So it's very interesting because we don't only have the element of the ocean and all of its fury, but we have that technological theme of Uranus, right, with the nuclear power plant and the weird the danger and the weird blending of those two threats, right? So that was kind of like, setting the tone for things going forward. That we were entering some strange times. So some other things that happened early on in this phase, we had Hurricane Sandy, which caused $70 billion in damage in 2012. It killed 233 people in the U.S. and Caribbean. Later on, we had Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico in 2017. That was a pretty big one. There was a typhoon in the Philippines, which killed 1,600 people. Of course, later on, through, was it 2024, we had the hurricanes that dropped trillions of gallons of water in North Carolina and Tennessee. Okay. We also recently heard a story, 2 hailstorms. Remember, I said water in all forms. Hailstorms that destroyed a bunch of solar panels in Texas. That's a pretty wild one. And then most recently, the LA fires, okay, which had so much to do, it was right on the coast of the ocean, but it had so much to do with a water crisis, with a lack of water. Remember, I said that earlier. Okay. So let's see. Another thought about that. So I want to say that as Uranus was traveling through Pisces prior to this period I'm talking about, just prior to 2012, it was seeding the sign Pisces in a sense. It was kind of adding in this heightened energy, which made things more ideological, more political, more strange and unusual, more volatile, right? So then as Neptune then entered Pisces, it was kind of reawakening that energy, adding that extra layer, right? And it's very highly politicized times, for example, very revolutionary, strange times. So I just had to mention that to be a little bit more rigorous, because it's very important that occurred. So those are some of the natural disasters. There was also a drought, a food crisis, which affected many people in the Sahel region. And I'm not sure if that's the Middle East or Africa. Okay. We also got this weird theme of like UFOs potentially having underwater bases and having lived under the ocean. This seems to be a story that's come up lately. Okay. Moving on to some science and technology now through the 2012 to 2025 period. We had the discovery of the Higgs boson particle, which is the God particle that scientists were looking for. The particle that gives mass to all the other particles. That's why it was called the God particle. It makes the universe possible. Talk about peering into the universe. Okay. Even more recently, there's been a story that scientists have been afraid that if they go in and tamper with this, they could alter the entire universe. It's about as far as it gets right there. Very significantly in 2015, we had the LIGO discovery. LIGO is a scientific project out west that was set to detect gravitational waves from the universe from the collision of 2 black holes. Okay, I just recently saw a Cosmos show about this, and it was amazing how they tracked this wave coming across the universe as human history was slowly beginning and then ramping up, and they were checking in. It was this close at this time. It was this close at this time. Anyway, and then it comes in and it conjoins that very sensitive detector, and it eureka! It discovers this gravitational wave that these things exist. Right, major discovery. Interestingly, within about 4 months of that period, Donald Trump announced he was going to run for president. So talk about a wave of power or strangeness hitting the planet. Okay. Now, this was not the only one they've discovered. They've discovered many since then. So this is going on in the universe, but this is when we became like aware of it. This was the moment in human history where we made that breakthrough. We also have the James Webb Telescope and its ability to peer into the depths of the universe. Okay. We have like these idealistic / realistic, I guess, plans to migrate into outer space, into Mars, along the lines of Elon Musk's projects. There's just a lot more talk about going out into space, I think, lately. I think science fiction itself has even made a comeback in these 12 years. We had a reboot of Lost in Space on Netflix. Things seem to have gotten a lot more cosmic. So that's very interesting, that desire to branch into outer space. Could it reflect some sense of an ending of human civilization, an ending of mankind? You hear talks of the ending of Western civilization, but maybe it's the whole deal, the whole human project. Okay, and we have these. Speaking of endings, there's so many reports about low fertility, alarming stories of the low fertility rates around the world. Okay, is AI bringing themes of the endings of an era? Right. You also get a lot of talk of language that reflects mental illness. Like, these are crazy times. These are insane times. The world's gone crazy. You see that almost like on a daily basis, right? And mental illness itself has become a very accepted and widely discussed topic. Of course, as it relates to the homeless crisis, also very widely discussed. Okay. Now, getting to more cultural moments from that period. Recently I saw a video called "Did the World End in 1999?" And basically the argument was that the prior decades, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, all had a distinct cultural style and distinct musical and fashion inventions and things of all those nature, right? And that all of a sudden everything just sort of stopped in the year 2000, and that from that point on, nothing really new has happened. And you could see a clip from a show in the early 2000s versus like right now, and everybody dresses the same. Nothing's really changed. Nothing's really evolving. Everything's just an amalgamation of the prior decades, right? Again, there's that theme that we've maybe run out of steam. That our entire culture is in some ways has played itself out. Okay. And, I'll go on this little tangent. Recently, so this idea of thinking of these tsunamis and stuff was like sewage. Or this thing about this 1999 video, like garbage, sewage. Like, there's just like this idea of things just being washed up, like cultural sewage, political sewage, spiritual sewage, because of the Pisces being a water sign, the last water sign. Water is meant to cleanse the body and to get rid of the toxins, right? So on the really negative dark side, these signs can carry a lot of that with them, right? A lot of that negativity that's supposed to be flushed out and transformed in some way. And then on my Instagram, Adam Carolla pops up, and he's standing out looking over Malibu, talking about how they have to rebuild the entire septic system before they do anything else. And he was going on and on about that. I was like, oh, well, I feel vindicated in that idea. Okay. So we also have the rise of Neptunian language, I think watery language, right? People talk about echo chambers. The word chamber, if you look it up, means bed originally, right? An echo, like something bouncing around in a limited space. Bubbles comes from water. You're in your own bubble. We're all in our little bubbles. Deep dives, 3-hour podcasts, I love this one. Gaslighting, like creating a fog. I heard somebody say the other day, "Oh, you're gaslighting yourself." You know, these new words and phrases that have come into our popular lexicon really reveal all this Neptunian phase that we've gone through. People use the word delusional a lot more, I've noticed. And I kind of already touched on that aspect of it in terms of mental illness. Vaping is an interesting one. It's like having your own personal fog. Now, this has become incredibly popular. We have Juul, which was a billion-dollar company, which had to reorganize and practically shut down. But anyway, vaping is very huge, and it may be a delusion. We'll see in the end whether or not it's healthier than smoking or not. But it's definitely an interesting Neptunian fog-like phenomenon, right? In pop culture, we had the Hunger Games that premiered. Now, this is interesting because we're looking for utopian themes. Just as was revealed in Hunger Games, this was a vision of a dystopia. Of course, depending on which character you related to in the story, I suppose. But that's very interesting how this came to the foreground of our consciousness, right? And, Hollywood, the film industry, could we have been seeing the death throes of the film industry? This is what many people are talking about on the internet. At least the demise of the film industry, and this great unveiling of the inner workings of the entertainment and film industry. I'm talking about, just name your scandal, okay? A whole list of scandals, ongoing scandals, even right up to the recent, was it Blake Lively, Ryan Reynolds scandal, which is an unveiling, reading people's text messages, and everything like that. It's kind of insane. But we also had in the entertainment sphere vampires, zombies, mermaids. We had Harry Potter. Okay, heavy fantasy with a strong dose of unconscious fears and monsters from the deep, right? From the deep unconscious that ride the line between life and death in an ambiguous way. In the case of Harry Potter, he rides the life between real life and magic, right? Very mystical. That's very Piscean. And when we get to the COVID crisis, things took a definite turn due to other transits, right? But Neptune and Pisces was still going on. But at that period, it was as if the first half of the first half of this transit, pre-COVID, we were content to live in the fantasy, right? And then reality hit, and we wanted to rip off the veils, right? And that seems to be a lot more happening in the second period of Neptune, post-COVID. Okay? Feminist movements, right, that were really strong going on. The dating world, generally, the red pill, kind of the veil being taken off of the way relationships work. And it's interesting that, Darwin published his Origin of Species, and then 150 years later, after this unveiling of evolution, we're still grappling and trying to understand gender roles, right? Okay, moving on to social media. So Facebook began in 2010, but it bought Instagram in 2012. So that was the advent of social media as we know it. Okay, it really got underway in 2012. And I emphasize Facebook and Instagram because all of a sudden we had everyone getting on board and sharing their dreams and their visions of their ideal life in an illusory presentation. Images, everything, more than ever. They would show themselves in these various blissful situations where they're holding their champagne glass at the premiere and projecting their best sides of themselves or the illusion of themselves. And this is the beginning of a lot of problems down the line, right? You have John Haidt writing his book, The Coddling of the American Mind, and his studies he's done on the damaging effects of social media, particularly on young people, right? People have gotten sort of submerged in this sort of tsunami of media. And then the word media is a medium, right? That's exactly what water points to in astrology, a medium. Another side note is I noticed as Uranus entered Aries around the same time, briefly we had that melding of the archetype of the self, Aries, and technology, new technology, Uranus, right? So this was initiating this period of the cell phone and going into your own little bubble, right? Being caught up in yourself, and the idea of the selfie began around that time, right? This narcissism, this self-indulgent. The cell phone is a sort of electronic nursery for our infantile egos to carry around, okay? So Neptune, is generally showing this flood of information over the past 12 years. Okay. All right. And in that, when I talk about the problems with social media with young people, we have the escapism, we have the flood of media and images, and we have mental illness, all wrapped into one in that discussion, right? There was a important book called Surveillance Capitalism that came out too, which was another unveiling of what these media companies are doing with all your data and all that stuff, which is crazy stuff. So let's see, a little more positive side. Of course, there's positive things to all this. And this is the way, like, our previous way of life, has dissolved and changed and morphed, right? We have like more online education classes, more people working online, working from home, like just people's daily lives started to change and morph in this whole 12-year period, especially because of COVID, right? But also, these online groups, conspiracy groups, radical groups, right? And returning to the idea of information, I mean, the question really is, we've had information in prior periods of history, right? And we would take different forms of information and put them together, and we would do something productive with it, right? We'd take mathematics, put it together with our knowledge of construction, and we'd build a monument or something, right? But what happens to civilization when the dominant activity becomes information itself, the moving and sharing of information? It's kind of strange, right? It's kind of unnatural. So I do think we experience the Neptune archetype as a flooding of information that doesn't necessarily have any coherence. And I know I personally struggle with this, with my YouTube feed. Not having like any structure to my viewing, right? That kind of annoys me. Just creates more confusion for myself. Let's see. Quick little pause. But I want to say a few things looking at the history of the internet, that Uranus and Neptune represent sort of two aspects of the internet. Uranus is the technology or the infrastructure, but Neptune is the collective consciousness, that the content, in a sense, of the internet, right? That's allowed to flow through that infrastructure. And to test my little theory, I dug around and I found that the person to first postulate the idea of the internet in the 60s, but it was like 1969 or so when it was published, when it was made public. It was, here's my theory of the internet. I don't have the fellow's name right now. And I was like, Uranus and Neptune weren't in a very close aspect exactly. I knew they were kind of sextile, which is a very harmonious aspect, but it wasn't quite there. So I dug a little deeper, and it was like that he actually did come up with the idea in a few years prior, 1967, is when he actually had in his notes this idea of the internet, and Uranus and Neptune were an exact sextile, right? Where the technology needed to share the total consciousness of humanity was formulated. That idea sprang to his mind. I think that's pretty cool. In a nutshell, that's what I found in that. Now we're going to look at U.S. politics a little bit. Okay. Okay. This is potentially a time where many will be devoting themselves to some kind of cause or be willing slaves somehow. You can see that politically on the right or the left, right? And that's something to look out for. That's why I put in my subtitle, Don't Be a Slave. Okay? Being swept up in the group, hypnotized. This is very Neptunian, okay? And that's what's been very strongly present the past 12 years. But looking at U.S. politics 2012, we had Barack Obama elected in 2012, okay? And subsequent in the United States, we had Biden, and then we had Trump, then we had Biden. We had 3 different presidents in this whole 12-year period. Very confusing, very vacillating, and a lot of change, right? No clear, consistent path for the United States. It's all very Neptunian, what we've been experiencing, and what Trump even comes back at the end of it. Okay. We also had Putin elected in 2012. I guess that wasn't surprising. Xi Jinping elected in China. So communism was going strong in 2012. And again, communism is a political system strongly connected to Pisces and Neptune. And we're still currently dealing with Russia and very concerned about Russia and China, really, currently right now. Okay. I guess we even had a Chinese spy balloon. We even thought the drones may be from China. So a lot of chaos, a lot of mayhem generally. Very fluid, mutable quality. A lot of end times fears going on. Fear of power slipping away, whether people are on the right or the left of politics. I think there's a lot of fear driving things, a lot of insecurity. Those are very Neptunian words. Okay. And just, topping it off, I would like to say that, we've gone through a couple of stages here. At the very end, we have something that I called end stage Neptune for about the past year, right? End stage Neptune. But more recently, we could call it Neptune's grand finale, right? As the North Node has been slowly aligning with Neptune, we've had this incredible revealing of the goings on in the United States government, all the corruption and all this money, billions of dollars flowing out the window thanks to the discoveries of Doge. Now, in some of my shorts, I talked about the North Node of the moon being basically a passageway, a doorway. It's the way through to the higher plane, to the higher consciousness, okay? Now, Neptune and that North Node have been aligning so that the way through has been through the unveiling. The way forward has been through this unveiling, okay? And so the unveiling thing has been super strong, especially with the actions of Doge. What a rant. I gotta shave that off. Maybe this is long enough for right now.